In this video, we will fix how the wrist rotates on the robot arm. Currently, it rotates at an awkward angle, so in order to straighten it out, we will first lock the location so it doesn't move out of place. Then we will temporarily disconnect the geometry so that we can adjust the placement of the control bone without getting any of the pieces out of line. Once we've done that, we can reconnect the geometry and reset the resting pose. After we're all done, we should have a very powerful rig that's super easy to use to move and manipulate the robot arm. Now, if I click and drag, I can still drag this around, which I don't want to. So let's set up some constraints to limit this movement. So I'm going to right click to cancel that, and we can come over here to our bone properties. Now we don't want to go down to viewport display and change this here, because that just changes the representation of that control. So I want to come up here to the actual transforms of our bone wrist, and we want to lock the location to all of that, because we don't want to click and drag this out anywhere. We just want to be able to rotate that, and that's what that does. So if we're in tweak mode, remember, we got to be in tweak mode. If we click and drag that, it'll rotate that right away because it can't move it anywhere. For our rotation, we want to change the mode from quaternion to XYZ Euler. And this is just going to change this so it's just 3 of them, and they're based on degrees instead of radians. Now, this is a little bit lopsided here, so this is not really straight on. So if I rotate the X, you can see it's kind of rotating at an angle. Same thing if I do it on the Y and the Z. It's just kind of rotating at this weird angle. We don't want it to rotate it like that. We want it to rotate right along, straight up and down the middle of this, rotating directly around this axis right here. And we can already do this if we come to our toolbar over here, and if you don't see this, by the way, it's T on the keyboard. If we come here and click rotate, now you can see we can just click and drag on that X just like we want. The problem is that this is in global mode, so if we actually move this anywhere, so let's select this, and if I press G to grab and move this somewhere else, now the X-axis hasn't changed, but our wrist has changed positions. So that doesn't really help us. We need to actually be able to rotate this on the local axis. So let's reset our pose here and come up here to local instead of global. And now you can see this red axis it's still off kilter. So we need to be able to actually rotate this so that the red x-axis is straight down the middle of the arm. So let's go into top mode, and we can adjust these here. So this is going to be the Y, and if it's not the Y for you, just mess with these and see which direction you need to change these to get that red x-axis lining up there. And it's kind of hard to see, maybe more like this. There we go. And then we can see if it's going straight down the middle there. Like that. Okay, and then we want the Z to be 0, and we want the X to be 0 as well. So now we have that red X line going right down the middle of the robot arm, but the problem is our wrist is a little twisted here now. And so what we have to do is we have to come back over here, and let's remember this. So we've got -29 here, and it may be a different number for you, so just remember whatever number that is. You can also hover your mouse over this Y field and press Ctrl-C to copy that value, because we're going to paste it in there later. But for now, we're going to change this to 0 to get that back to the resting pose. What we have to do is we have to disconnect our geometry while we fix the rotation. So let's go back into object mode, and then we can start selecting and then shift selecting these 4 pieces that are connected to that bone. Then press Alt-P and then clear parent, keep transformation. Now if we select our armature, go back into pose mode, when we rotate this, our geometry doesn't follow. So now we can come back over here and paste that value back in here, which was -29 in my case. Again, it might be different in yours. Okay, so now let's go back out into object mode. We're going to reparent this by selecting and shift selecting the rest of them. And then with shift still held, selecting the armature as the last one, go back into pose mode, make sure this bone is the only one that's selected. Control-P, and then set parent to bone. And now we can take this x-axis, and that's going to rotate that around this joint axis perfectly. And even if we grab this and move this over here, we can still click this one and rotate it on the x-axis correctly. All right, but we want to actually be in tweak mode to do this. So let's just select everything, Q all. Oh, and it looks like we need to reset the resting pose here to our 29 degrees here. So right now, if I select all and go back to our resting pose, it goes back to 0, which we don't want. So we need to make 29 our resting pose. So just make sure that we have 29 here, and this is the only bone that we have selected. Come up to pose, apply, and then select apply selected as rest pose. And now that's at 0 as our resting pose, and we actually don't even need the Z and the Y rotation, so let's lock those. We also don't need the scale, so we're going to lock all of that. So now with our tweak mode enabled, all we have to do is click and drag, and that's going to rotate around the correct axis, the only axis that's available, and that's going to do it straight away. So now what we have, after all of that work, is something that we can click and drag and move around, and click and drag and rotate, and click and drag and move, and it moves exactly how we would expect it to move if we were moving this in real life as a real life robot arm. I'm going to also select this one. We're going to change the mode here to XYZ Euler as well, and just lock all of these because we're only going to use the location for this. And now A, Q, all, rest pose, and we've got a very easy rig that we can even, from far away, click and easily move how we want. No trouble at all. But after everything's set up correctly, it's going to help you so much with ease of animation. Having said that, this will work with something like this that does not have an extension. So remember, we actually have a little piece inside here that extends out, like a little piston that we pull out. So the way we have it set up now won't actually work with the piston. But if you don't need that piston, if you're working with another object that doesn't have an extension, this is going to be a perfectly fine setup. But we do have an extension, so that is what we're going to talk about next. Let's get back to our resting pose, go into our side view, and when you're ready, head on over to the next video.